Tonight, saving the world. Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama all made the sacred pilgrimage to Normandy.
And these are the heroes who helped end a war.
Now it's Joe Biden's turn to memorialize D-Day. Can he fill the shoes? Boy moms. Is the next generation of American men failing because of their moms or in spite of them? And stop the music. Big name artists scratch summer concert tours over sagging ticket sales. How buying groceries became the big splurge for American families. And we start with breaking news, 7 p.m. Eastern, and you can see the Eiffel Tower of Paris, 1 a.m. in the morning there. President Biden will wake up in just a few hours from now and face perhaps the most important or one of the most important moments of his presidency just a couple of hours from now. He heads to Normandy, the cliffs and the beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Sword, Juneau, Pointe du Hoc. Words, names, places that are etched in American history. And he will be there for a speech honoring the men of D-Day 80 years later. If you've never been there, Normandy is a place unlike any other in the world. It is beautiful, as you can see from the pictures. The American cemetery there sits above Omaha Beach. There's the big slope that the men fought their way up 80 years ago today. And Omaha Beach represents the singular moment in time that America saved freedom. The crosses there at the cemetery at Omaha are the men who gave their lives. Omaha Beach, D-Day, represents the economic might of America to build the ships, the bravery of the young men willing to die for democracy, the willingness of a country to fight for others. Nothing like that had ever happened before in the world. 80 years ago at Normandy, it happened. America did it. Tomorrow, Mr. Biden will say we are at a similar point in history. Back on D-Day, during World War II, it was Roosevelt, Churchill, and de Gaulle who took on Adolf Hitler. Today, we have Biden, Macron, and Sunak taking on Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, the Ayatollah, Kim Jong-un. One would wonder whether Mr. Biden really wants to invite the comparison, right, between himself and Roosevelt, between his leadership and what America displayed in World War II. For those who worry about stumbling into World War III, it is a pretty serious bar to set for yourself that you are the man for the time. But the president's national security advisor, John Kirby, said, quote, he will take full advantage of the opportunity to talk about the moment we are living in, of democracies working together on behalf of their peoples, but also the importance of American leadership. I've been in Washington for an awfully long time, but I have no earthly idea what that quote means. 80 years is a long time since the D-Day invasion. Few of the men who stormed the beaches are alive today, but many were alive 40 years ago. June 6, 1984. Ronald Reagan at the time faced a tough re-election fight. He faced an arms race with the Russians, who had invaded Afghanistan. He faced multiple crises and conflicts around the world, and Iran itching to make its mark, having killed Americans. And then 40 years ago, 40 years after D-Day, he arrived at Pointe du Hoc.
Here in this place, where the West held together, let us make a vow to our dead. Let us show them by our actions that we understand what they died for. Let our actions say to them the words for which Matthew Ridgway listened. I will not fail thee nor forsake thee.
Nobody had to wonder what Reagan meant. The world knew, and more importantly, the world believed him. Tomorrow is just a few hours away. Tomorrow morning is just a few hours away in Paris. Tomorrow won't be about if President Biden can actually say the words of his speech. Sadly, that is in question. But to be fair, there are moments he has rallied. He did it in Poland when talking about Vladimir Putin a couple of years ago. The question in just a few hours is whether the world will believe his words, not just for the sake of his presidency, but for the sake of freedom. Start tonight with Geraldo Rivera, NewsNation contributor at large, Peabody Award-winning journalist. Geraldo, good to see you. Did I set the stakes too high?
Thank you, Leland. You too? Well, I guess maybe. I think it was really poetry, and I enjoyed your commentary immensely. Now, did you set the stakes too high in making the premise that Biden is trying to compare himself to Roosevelt and these times to those times? I think so. I mean, having visited the D-Day beaches and the museum and being so deeply touched and meeting many of the older gentlemen who served in the greatest generation and being deeply moved by their sacrifice and seeing where the parachutists were hung up and the Nazis killed them and the hedgerows and so forth. That was a time where really democracy hung by a thread, and in the balance and all the rest of it. Those times aren't these times. The world is not at war. I think the comparison President Biden is striving for here, Leland, and I think you know as well as I do, is to make sure that the United States doesn't falter in giving aid to Ukraine in its existential fight against Russia.
Geraldo, you said the magic word of democracy,
succeed.
and the word democracy is important because what you said about President Biden will talk about fighting for democracy. He's the one who makes the references that democracy is under threat. People are a threat to democracy, as was Adolf Hitler, as was Mussolini, as is, and I think we can all agree, Vladimir Putin. But at the State of the Union, he said democracy is at risk abroad, referring to Vladimir Putin, and at home, effectively comparing Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump and putting them on the same level. Will he be able to resist that urge for political points tomorrow?
I think he's talking more about Putin and Xi and the other autocrats in Central Europe and elsewhere. I don't think that he was referring to President Trump. I think that some things you can't
I have the quote right here. I have the quote right here. He talked about at the State of the Union, democracy is at threat abroad and here at home, referring to Donald Trump.
Well, I didn't hear it that way, and I refuse to believe that the president would go so blatantly making a comparison between Hitler and Trump. That's not the dialogue. I don't believe that anybody gets that message. I don't think that anybody takes away from President Biden's remarks. As clumsy as he may be, as bad as he is in reading the teleprompter, as stumbling as he may be for whatever frailty the Wall Street Journal and others are pointing out, he's not that that dumb that he's going to make that comparison. Not in his heart of hearts. Anyway, politics is politics. This is a war where we had to rid, many occupied countries of the fascist beasts who were incinerating hundreds of thousands, millions of innocent people in the ovens of Auschwitz and elsewhere. That was the fight of our I was alive then. Biden was alive. I mean, we were babies, but we were alive in World War II. It's hard to believe. Probably the only one listening to the sound of my voice that was similar. But going back to what tomorrow represents, and without trying to shoehorn it into a political reality of today, what tomorrow represents is the greatest generation. 80 years ago, standing up against the totalitarian, the fascists that had occupied half the world, and fought back and defeated them. If he, stretches a bit to maintain support for NATO, which I think is key to American security going forward. NATO was born basically on D-Day as well, the international alliance of which you spoke so eloquently at the top of the program. You had the Canadians and the Brits and the French resistance and the others fighting against the Germans and the Russians coming in from the eastern. Right now, for Ukraine, there is a comparison between
there's no question there's a comparison to
and right now.
What is happening. No, there's no question. You're right. There is a comparison to the threats facing the world as 80 years ago. And I would argue those threats existed 40 years ago, right? You covered Reagan. You understood the stakes 40 years ago when Ronald Reagan went to point to Hock. And you think about other presidents who've come through at different times. George H.W. Bush, who came through Normandy. Then Bill Clinton, who gave the anniversary speech on the 50th. George W. Bush, and then Barack Obama, all who came through on these 10-year anniversary marks. And they all understood that they were speaking as much to the American audience as they were speaking to the world as the leader of the free world. And having covered all these men, I'm wondering if you think, and America is always stronger when our president is respected and trusted by our allies and feared by our enemies, whether Joe Biden, and I hate to ask this question, has the ability both in temper and in presence to give the kind of speech that is required of an American president on the 80th anniversary of D-Day.
I hope that you join me in hoping that he is up to the task.
We all hope
that he won't lose his place in the teleprompter and so forth. And I hope that we all root for him. I want him to be that person. But I think that however frail he may be, however we worry about his ability to command an occasion as profound as tomorrow's, I hope that everyone wants him to succeed, and that just for a couple of hours, let's just say that's America. He's standing on that beach where there's so many sacrifices were made. We stood together then. We're going to stand together now. I want him to make that speech. We're one. We're together against the totalitarian oppressors, and they know who they are. We know who they are, and I think that it is very important for him to keep NATO supported.
No, look, Geraldo. Every American is always better off when our president does well. Whether you like him, whether you don't like him, whether you respect him, you like his policies. Anytime the president of the United States is overseas, we should all be rooting for him. It's that simple. We are all become part of one team, which brings me to my last question. I'm going to ask you for a yes or no answer because we're going to get to a longer segment about this later. But you used to work for Rupert Murdoch, as did I. But you knew him better, and you were more important than I was, so you have better insights into these things than I do. Rupert Murdoch's Wall Street Journal dropped a devastating story as President Biden got on Air Force One, seriously calling into question his mental fitness. Did the Wall Street Journal publish that story with Rupert Murdoch's approval?
I don't think that Mr. Murdoch has that inline command of the day-to-day anymore, and I'm not sure that he is asked that question of whether or not he should run it anymore. I can't give you a yes or no. I just, if you would ask me that question 5 years ago, I would have said yes. Rupert was involved in the decision, but now he's emeritus more than anything. I don't mean that to evade your question.
No,
but I think that the Wall Street Journal knew exactly what it was doing.
Yep.
They knew what they were doing. They wanted to sting him. And they hit him hard with that, and that of course will be the issue. More than inflation, more than the border, more than anything will be competency and Kamala Harris, I believe, succession if the Democrat wins. But what the Wall Street Journal did was a hit piece. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah.
It wasn't particularly. If he had stumbled tomorrow in the speech, and then they wrote that he had lost it. But let's hope that he succeeds tomorrow, and that America looks good and reliable and competent, and the message is united Europe against Russia in favor of Ukraine. Then I'm all for that.
All right, I'm going to take that as a no. Rupert did not prior approve. Geraldo, thank you very much, my friend. We'll see you soon. We wrote about all of this earlier today in War Notes. That is our newsletter that gives you a look at the most important stories of the day and our thoughts about it. It's free, comes out every day at 4 o'clock. You'll hear our thoughts about President Biden's speech at Leland Vittert on Instagram and Twitter. And you can sign up at warnotes.com. A generation of young men, the very same generation that would have to go to war again, are lost in a perfect storm of loneliness. How decent people can come back, how decent young men can come back from the Me Too movement and complaints about toxic masculinity. Plus, we'll dive in a little bit more to that Wall Street Journal report that says what you are looking at here, President Biden's performance on Tuesday that left a lot of awful questions. Well, what really happens behind closed doors? Was the Wall Street Journal right to publish it? When we come back. There's a new trend on social media. There's lots of things that happen on social media, but this one caught our eye. Mothers sharing their joy of having boys, great, but then there's this sort of tone to it that they're excited about having a boy rather than having a girl.
A mother is a son's first true love. A son, especially that first son, is a mother's last true love.
Are we really shocked by that woman being like, I love my daughter, but my son has my heart? Like, boy moms will know.
I never thought that I would be that toxic boy mom. I love my 4 kids equally, but that last little boy just hits different. And now I feel like I'm having this existential crisis, or I wouldn't be that mom, that toxic boy mom.
Lot to unpack there. But despite a mother's love, Ruth Whitman writes in the New York Times, boys get everything except the thing that's most worth having. I have come to believe the conditions of modern boyhood amount to a perfect storm for loneliness. No argument there. Studies support that. All the old deficiencies and blind spots of male socialization are still in circulation, but in screen-addicted culture, war-torn America, we have also added new ones. Ruth is the mother of 3 boys, out with a new book, Boy Mom, Reimagining Boyhood in the Age of Impossible Masculinity, and is with us now. Ruth, excited to have you on, and your New York Times piece is phenomenal. It rightly points out how young men in America are getting lost between the left and the right culture war. But just from the basics here, I looked this up, and there's very competing definitions of what a boy mom is. And is that something at the very basic that is different than a mother of young men?
So I think that the kind of boy mom hashtag as it exists online is this identity that some mothers are taking on. So there's obviously like a boy mom, like a mom of boys, but then there's people who really strongly identify that way on social media, and that they can perpetuate a lot of almost quite sexist stereotypes, I think, online. So, you know, I called my book Boy Mom, but I don't necessarily identify as a hashtag boy mom myself. I just sort of wanted to explore the phenomenon.
So there's this common, there's a common phrase in Arabic, Abu al-Banat, the father of daughters, and the joke is the father of all daughters. There's some responsibilities that come with that, on and on and on. But it kind of is more of a joke in speaking to the love that fathers have of their daughters. Some of those sound bites about the love a mother has for her sons. What's the whole toxic part of this?
Well, so I think that, as I wrote in the op-ed today, I think what's happened to boys at the moment is that they're caught between these two kind of definitions of manhood and what it means to be a man. And so, like, the old system was the thing that sort of said to boys, you know, you can't express your emotions, you have to man up, you have to be stoic and strong and tough. And I think that kind of kept boys quite silenced. But now there's sort of a new kind of way that they're being silenced from a new narrative, which is just kind of, boys, you're so privileged, you know, that you have all the power, and so now it's time for you to be quiet and let somebody else talk. So I think boys in general are feeling just kind of shut down from all sides. And I think when it comes to the mothers, there is this research that shows that all parents, not just mothers, kind of do talk to their sons quite differently than they talk to their daughters. So they use more emotion words with their daughters. They're more sort of a lot more roughhousing and wrestling with boys. And they don't teach them so many sort of social emotional skills. So I think boys aren't really learning the skills that they need to be socially and emotionally competent in the world.
Boy, I feel like I'm in a therapy session as I think back to my my childhood. I think my mom taught me a lot about emotion, but look, we're in different times now. You think about the role of men in society that has been sort of ingrained genetically from evolution, right? And the male species, and since we came out of the cave, men were mostly the hunter-gatherers. They were the protector of the family. They were leaders of the family, especially over the past couple of millennia. Is there something in this movement that's trying to kind of change that or beat that out of men rather than celebrate it?
Well, I think there's a lot of evidence to show the opposite, actually, as well, which is that hunter-gatherer societies were actually quite equal compared to modern society. And the sort of systems of patriarchy are a more recent invention. So I think this narrative that it's all from evolution and men are biologically programmed to be the leaders and the pursuers isn't actually quite accurate.
Okay, and so ... we're kind of going back to parity, and that's what mothers of sons are trying to teach?
Yeah, so I think we're just in a very, very difficult cultural moment where we're fighting all these different competing cultural forces. So we're fighting, the old school sort of norms of masculinity, which are quite, which kind of bear down on boys in quite difficult ways, And when I talk, as research for my book, I talked to lots and lots of boys. I talked to maybe 50 boys over the space of 3 years. And one of the things that they kept on saying was that they were lonely. They felt like they really didn't have a place to sort of voice their emotions in any way, because either they were being shut down politically or they were being shut down by this kind of masculine, toughen up and don't say how you feel. So I think they felt like they just didn't really know how to be. And I think there's this like micro generation, the boys that I was talking to, there's this real little micro generation that were going through puberty when the Me Too movement really kicked off. And they're now of like college age, voting age, and I think they feel quite resentful, they feel quite lost, they're isolated, and I think they just don't know how to be. And I think that we all need to just take a step back and engage with them in a more generous way and give them some space.
Boy, your boys are so lucky to have you as a mom. That's what I took away from reading your piece and from listening to you just now. And I think about how many mothers are terrified of their sons going off to college now, as you point out, after puberty, through Me Too, and now the way that things have changed on college campuses. This is the first time we talked. It won't be the last. Ruth, this is great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. The White House is furious with a new Wall Street Journal report saying President Biden has really lost it. Why did the report come out just as Mr. Biden headed out on the most important trip of his presidency? There's a Paris where President Biden wakes up in a few hours, literally with the world's eyes upon him. We'll see if the Eiffel Tower lights up for us. All the more so because of a devastating Wall Street Journal piece that dropped just before he got on Air Force One. Behind closed doors, Biden shows signs of slipping. Participants in meetings said the 81-year-old president performed poorly at times. The White House said Biden is sharp and his critics are playing partisan politics. Colby Hall is here, founding editor at Mediaite, also a NewsNation contributor. Boy, there's so much to unpack in this. So short questions, short answers, I promise. I asked Geraldo this. Any chance this was done without Rupert Murdoch signing off on it?
I think so, yes. Directly, probably not directly signed off, but, there were probably people that were eager to please the boss and know what he wants. So the idea that this is his sort of thinking or ethos.
So does that mean the gloves are off now?
Well, honestly, I think it's a serious issue. I take issue with the report, the journalistic standards here, but candidly, anyone who's watched Biden over the last 3 years can tell that he's stiffened, he's slower, that he's not as sharp. And the White House has said forever, behind the scenes, he's smooth as a Swiss watch. And this story sort of, disabuses us of that notion. I will say, however, they only really sourced House Republicans. Yeah. And it would have been way better had they been able to find some other, sort of Democrats that concurred with that idea, which unfortunately, I think this is a serious story that we should take, this should call to question whether
you have to take it seriously, right? That's the whole problem with it. And you're right. The reporting on it is, I don't want to say thin as turnip soup, because that's sort of an insult to turnip soup, but it's really thin in that it relies a lot on Kevin McCarthy, who is on the record in other situations, kind of, sort of on the record. One time, I think the White House is mincing words, but they don't seem to have the goods, if you will, and maybe this is why the story works, is because it confirms what so many people see every day, right? We see him stumble. We see him clearly have senior moments. We see him clearly look lost when he's walking on and off stage, or trying to remember leaders' names, or confusing events, or whether he was the vice president during the pandemic or during the recession, and then his physical issues as well. And nobody wants to see this from the president himself. The White House and the Wall Street Journal points to this now, where he's using the short stairs on Air Force One. The White House kept close tabs on some of the Wall Street Journal's interviews with Democratic lawmakers. After the offices of several Democrats shared with the White House either a recording of an interview or details about what was asked, some of those lawmakers spoke to the Journal a second time and once again emphasized Biden's strengths. If the Trump White House had done that, it would have been an affront to the First Amendment.
Are you saying there's different standards? I think that's fair. Look, the White House communications team was clearly in damage control mode. They not only sent out their minions to sort of reaffirm this idea, this narrative that Biden is sharp as a tack, but they also, and I think this is a fair point, made sure that those Democratic leaders, including Speaker Pelosi, made clear that she was interviewed for this piece, but her comments were not included. Now, of course, their comments probably were all like White House laundered, Joe Biden's got it together. And I think the author, while is sort of not above some sort of criticism, she defended on CNN today saying, our job is to paint an accurate picture to the readers, and we did that. So that suggests that they're sort of off the record reporting. I do think, though, that it would have been a lot stronger piece if there were more Democrats. We always condemn Republicans for not calling out Trump and his crazy. Well, the same holds for the Democrats. It's clear that Biden has lost a step or two, and it would be great if Democrats were to, step up and say,
just be intellectually honest enough to admit it. Boy, Colby, awesome points as always. And look, points to Geraldo, I think, also, who said that it would have been a lot stronger had they waited to see what happened at Normandy, because it would have had so much more of an impact if he didn't take any questions from the press during this trip, if he stumbles tomorrow or over the next couple of days, if there's one of these moments, then the piece would sort of match what everyone was saying at the time. Colby, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Leland.
Yeah, good to see you. Today, actually, one day before the anniversary of D-Day, marks 20 years since the death of President Ronald Reagan, and 20 years since his speech at D-Day. 40 years since the speech. He died 20 years later. This week, NewsNation is looking back at some of the most important moments, the world-changing moments of his presidency, including the most unlikely of friendships that developed between Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev that helped end the Cold War.
We have listened to the wisdom in an old Russian maxim, doverяй, no proverяй, trust but verify.
Но значение этого...
На каждой встрече вы это повторяете.
You repeat that at every meeting.
I like it.
Мне нравится.
Oh boy, I've seen a lot of it, of the cut of this, and you won't want to miss it. It's phenomenal. And it brings to life so many of the reasons we all cherish Ronald Reagan. NewsNation Films presents Reagan, Portrait of Presidency this Saturday. So much of this documentary is in Ronald Reagan's own words. So you relive the moments that have defined history and changed history in many, many ways that still live on today. Saturday at 9 p.m. Eastern right here on NewsNation, and then I'll be around post-show with George Will and a surprise guest. Every day brings good news for Donald Trump, literally every day. Yet he seems unable to capitalize it. Will he ever stop giving a hateful media ever more fodder? His lead with black voters happening. Inflation is a leading concern among Americans happening. The border remains a massive problem. As we told you, there is now major reporting on some of his senior moments for Joe Biden, and nobody cares about Donald Trump's 34 felony convictions. That's the latest polling out of Georgia. In fact, people keep giving him money. He's raised over $200 million since the conviction. Yet every day, Donald Trump insists on saying something profoundly stupid.
Nobody wanted to bring it until I decided to run, and then was beating everybody by a lot, and then was beating Biden by a lot in the polls. But, you know, it's a very terrible thing. It's a terrible precedent for our country. Does that mean the next president does it to them?
Evan Gershkovich, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal who is being held by Russia, will be released almost immediately after the election, but definitely before I assume office. He will be home. He will be safe. Vladimir Putin, president of Russia, will do that for me. Hillary Clinton, I didn't say lock her up, but the people would all say lock her up, lock her up. Okay, then we won.
And he said lock her up, just for the record. Mark Lauder is here, former special assistant to President Trump. Ashley Pratt-Oates, political commentator, and a former Republican is with us. Rule number one, Mark, in politics, when your opponent is floundering, just don't do anything. Just sit back and watch it happen. Why, after 10 years in politics, has President Trump not learned that lesson?
Well, and I would even add, Sunday morning on the Fox and Friends program, he had actually asked about his retribution and his revenge, and I thought he gave a great answer. America's success will be my ultimate revenge, will be the ultimate retribution.
Wait, so, and then 2 days later?
And then 2 days later, and we'll go back to the Sunday morning when he talked about America's success being the best revenge. And I do think he was talking in retrospective when he was talking about looking back and how everyone wanted him to do these things. And I do think as he pivots forward, it's got to be about America's success.
He won't let that happen, though, because it's the Trump show. That's been the problem all along with his politics, is it's his ego rules everything. Everything is entertainment. It is the Trump show. And that's his background in entertainment that has led him to where he is, and that is why he orates the way he does, because he knows it will garner support. So basically right now, as we just saw, the Georgia polling, right, has him... Nobody cares. Nobody cares about the 34
He's up a point with independents on it.
Nobody cares that an independent jury, which I'm sure some of them must have been Trump supporters or voters, put their...
I'm not sure how you get 12 in New York, but okay, go ahead.
Well, point is, statistically, there could be one.
Could be one.
Could be one, but all the votes, 12-0, every count. So point here, right, is people put their political views aside. As Americans, that's our judicial system. And the party of law and order, so-called, is now allowing a convicted felon to be the party's nominee. Not only that, but support lawlessness by saying, let's prosecute our...
Yeah, no, that part I just can't figure out. So, Mark, this is the question. And you actually said the Trump show. It's interesting because in the 1980s, Donald Trump gave an interview to Playboy magazine. I don't know if you've seen this, where he said it's called the Trump show. It's sold out everywhere. Are we at a point, perhaps, where Donald Trump is more concerned about his ego and litigating things and what he sees on television than he is with winning?
No, I think he's actually building the coalition to win. I mean, right now you are still coalescing a Republican base, which is massively behind you. The record fundraising post-conviction, it shows that the American people, a majority of the American people, including a third of the new small dollar donors being first-time donors, that means people who were not donors in 16 or 20 are now saying, enough. I'm supporting this guy. We've got to get him into office. And as he starts moving forward, as we start going into the summer, the conventions, the fall, it's going to come down to inflation. It's going to come down to the border, like you said. And I think that's where the messaging will be.
Look, if it's a referendum on Joe Biden and inflation and the border, Donald Trump wins. It's fairly simple. I think we can kind of all agree on this. So, Ashley, what does the Never Trump movement do to stay relevant when you have an electorate now that clearly is more angry about what's happened in Joe Biden's record than they are concerned about what crazy things Donald Trump might say.
I mean, that's a great point. I've been called crazy all along, but then he gets convicted and I don't feel as crazy anymore because the things that were said all along was that he wasn't doing anything wrong or illegal. Well, he has been. And in many ways, he was doing it to fuel his own ego and his own candidacy. And here we are now where people are donating to him when he's been bankrupting his entire donor base. Like, this is a scheme. Like, this has always been a scheme of Trump's where he gets people to buy into something. Trump steaks, Trump wine.
I get it, but it works. And I think there was a tweet today about the Georgia polling that showed Donald Trump up in Georgia after the conviction. And there was a CNBC anchor who tweeted out bonkers, as if it is bonkers that this were to happen. And at some point, I thought, is bonkers what deplorables and people who cling to their guns and religion do? I don't know if this is a winning strategy from your guys' perspective, is it?
No, but why is Nikki Haley still garnering 20% of primary votes when she's not on the ballot anymore and Trump is? That tells you right there there's enough independents and never Trump people still left in the Republican Party who feel differently and feel like Trump is unfit to be the president of the United States and to be the standard bearer of the Republican Party.
He says he was...
So at that point, then, you're just basically saying we're fine with inflation, we're fine with the open border, we're fine with the wars.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying...
Because that's the choice.
Are the Republicans now saying that they're the party of law and order, that they have been all along, because that didn't happen on January 6th and that didn't happen now?
We were doing so good. We almost
got there.
We were on balance.
Almost got there.
You know?
All right. Thank you both. We really appreciate it. This was great.
Thank you, Leland.
Thank you. Talk to you soon. Big name singers, speaking of inflation, are canceling summer concerts because nobody is buying tickets. What else American consumers will cut back on this summer now that they literally can't afford fun? To put it quite simply, the American consumer is done, tapped out, however you want to put it in words. Their budgets are stretched as far as possible, maybe even farther than possible. New polling shows 62% of voters are cutting back on their purchases. More than half say they are living paycheck to paycheck. They're cutting back on groceries. More than 50% of Americans say groceries. Eating out, clothing, and entertainment is at 68%. When Americans are just trying to cover their mortgages and bills, it's no surprise that the first thing to go from the budget is fun. Who gets hurt first in that? Performers. They're having to completely reframe their tours amid a plunge in ticket sales. The Black Keys are canceling their arena tour and will be cutting down their venue sizes, and J-Lo is canceling her tour altogether. With us now, Lauren Wright, Associate Research Scholar, Lecturer in Politics, Public Affairs, Princeton University, and Kurt Bardella, NewsNation contributor and Democratic strategist and J-Lo enthusiast, which is why you are...
Are you?
Am I?
Now you
For
are.
the purpose of tonight's segment.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Is this the beginning, Lauren, of consumers finally ending the YOLO phase of the pandemic?
Post-pandemic.
Of, hey, let's go and spend money because we didn't have any fun, and now reality is setting in?
Maybe. I mean, I think that's a good hypothesis. I also think there's a lot going on. There's a ton of competition, and maybe some of these artists overshot these huge sports arenas that they're trying to book out, and
so
not everyone's making it.
I don't know. I mean, I can't figure out if we're reading too much into this one little thing because the headline may be better. But then you look at this Redfin data that just came out. The average mortgage payment for the average American home is now $2,900 a month. That's up from about $1,600 in 2021. And is that, Kurt, why 2/3 of Americans say they feel the state of the economy is poor?
Yeah, because nothing hits closer to home than, your home. And when you're writing that monthly check, you know.
$1,000 per month less to spend.
Yeah, but I do think when it comes to the live touring side, like, again, remember, last summer was the summer of these two mega tours, Beyonce, Taylor Swift, and the tickets for those were insane. They were incredibly expensive. And so it's not surprising to me that a year later, when those tours aren't going, some of these fans are like, well, I may not be spending all of this money this year on the Black Keys because I spent all that money last year on T Swift and Beyonce. But I will say, other genres, like country music, are selling tickets. Morgan Wallen selling out stadiums. I was at Dallas Cowboys Stadium the other week watching Kenny Chesney and Zach Brown Band sell out the largest stadium, the largest football stadium in America. So
look, this may be, and if we want to get really broad here, of who has money right now and who doesn't, and where their political support is going. And if you want to think about country music support, broadly speaking, is going to Donald Trump. I think I can say that. But then we're seeing this massive change. We get a little, everything's a little. But then we get this massive change, and this is happening among black support. 2020 national exit poll, 87% Joe Biden, Donald Trump 12. 2024 presidential election poll, 72% Joe Biden, 18% Donald Trump. And we're seeing that, Lauren, in young black men over the issue of the economy.
Yes, and I think there are a lot of really desperate people who are not even thinking about concert tickets. That is an elite concern. Maybe we're all going to concerts and we're very, very lucky, but most people are not making concert going decisions. They're making, I have to take this out of the grocery cart decision. I can't bring my kid to that activity. I mean, people are very angry, which is what's reflected in the numbers that you're talking about.
Yeah, there's a real anger, right? When you're having to choose what you put in and out of your grocery cart, that's not a concern Americans are used to having.
Yeah.
58% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That number's a lot higher when it comes to younger voters.
Well, and when we talk, even what we talked about this morning, like you're going to be paying more for your air conditioning this summer.
Yes.
Right? At least 7% more than you did last year. It's like parents are having to budget now in a way where they're assuming higher costs than they've ever had for food, for just basic utilities, for home rent. Like that money's got to come from somewhere, and like you said, the first place you go to find that money is the fund budget.
You get extra points and you get extra donuts tomorrow for acknowledging that the three of us were at your service this morning, starting at 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., and we will be back tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. for President Biden's speech at the D-Day events. It gets underway at about 7 a.m. Eastern when he shows up at Omaha Beach. Real quick, final word from you guys on that. How high are the stakes for tomorrow?
I think because of that Wall Street Journal story, the stakes are pretty high.
Even higher, for sure. Long speech, detailed, very high.
Long speech, detailed, and also the way it is delivered matters.
But it's an opportunity. This is an opportunity for Biden to, once again, like he did with the State of the Union, kind of put some egg on the Wall Street Journal.
And the risk not to talk about Trump. He should not even
Don't even say his name.
mention it.
Don't even say his name.
And look, the White House won't say this, but lowering expectations worked during the State of the Union for the White House. It worked in their favor. We see what happens now. All right, 6 a.m. Eastern, right back. We will all be here with coffee. You all get some sleep. You all watch Chris Cuomo. He's next.